Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Perform Happy Podcast. I'm really excited today to have somebody with me who I see so much eye to eye with. And this just gives me so much hope for the sport of gymnastics and trampoline that there are great coaches out there who are sponges and learning and always wanting to do right by their athletes. And then also having incredibly high levels of success. That combination just lights me up. James Coomber, welcome to the show.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So I, of course, have heard of you through the great Louise Brownsey, who is the world champion trampolinist who was on the show not too long ago. And she just sung your praises, and we're like, we got to get you on the show. So would you give a little background on your gymnastics history before we get into your coaching?
Okay, well, but basically, I'm 40 years old now, and I started when I was 3, and I competed right up until I was about 27, and then decided that my knees hurt, my back hurt, everything hurt, and I started coaching when I was about 15, and I always kind of knew from about 20-ish that I'd probably make a better coach than a performer, and so I kind of worked out that that was going to be the thing that I wanted to go into. And I feel sometimes that's what kind of helps my coaching a little bit is that I was good, but I wasn't really great. And I found things a struggle and I found things quite hard. And like I didn't pick up skills as easy and I had to go about it in different ways. And I had great coaches who helped me with lots of different methods. And I kind of feel the experience you have when it's not easy, then it helps you kind of pick up to the people that are also finding it hard a bit later on down the way. And you can like, as much as it's great to have an Olympian as a coach, sometimes that can go, oh yeah, this is how you do this and this is how you do that. Sometimes it's nice to be able to sit there with someone and go, I know exactly how you feel. I struggled with this move as well. And this is some of the methods that I tried to do. So I kind of feel like that was the area I had. I've worked, I've always been at the same club in Gillingham down in Kent in the UK. And I basically performed there from 3 all the way through to now. And I had the best mentors through Martin Laws. He basically ran our club and then managed to get the Europe's first purpose-built trampoline facility. And our facility, when it opened in 1996, was Europe's first one. And he alone generated this. All the people that wanted to turn the space into soccer pitches because soccer generated more money. Do you know what I mean? And when he's trying to pitch a niche trampoline gymnastics centre against 20 soccer pitches, the local council and government were like, surely we're going to make more money with the soccer. And he alone managed to get that building done. And he's just so passionate and such a great mentor. And like since he's retired recently, I've always wanted to make sure that I can instill some of our own things into the centre, but also like carry his messages through as well.
I can just imagine the Aaron Brockovich style movie of him in the offices and campaigning for this big dream that he's got. I mean, not the same, but I can feel the passion as you talk about him. And what is it like being sort of mentored and I would say probably coached by this incredibly passionate individual? What did that give you?
It was such a journey because like he's very strict and he's very disciplined, and he had an Olympian in 2004. We had a guy called Gary Smith who went to the Athens Games, and Martin was his personal coach, and I trained with Gary, so it was always nice just having lots of success. I mean, like our club started in 1979, I think it was, and every year bar one from 1988 through to now, we've had someone on the GB team in either in a junior capacity or a senior capacity at the World Championships. So I think 1994 we missed one, and he'll always say that like it was a bad year for illness and stuff like that and everything. He'll always make some sort of thing. But so from 1988 through to like recently, we've had someone from jumpers on a world championship team, whether it's junior or senior. And like obviously it might get harder as the years go on. And but we like to think that's a wicked achievement.
Absolutely. I mean, the longevity and now you have taken the reins. Do you feel pressure? I mean, that winning streak, does that put pressure on your shoulders? How do you sort of respond to this legacy that you have stepped into?
Well, it's like my friend and I who have taken over the reins, and Martin's wife has only just semi-retired. Um, we're kind of doing it as a free at the moment. But I mean, as you know, like centres like ours, it's run by a whole unit. Like we've got such wonderful coaches and such wonderful like volunteers, and even though myself and Mark and Liz, Martin's wife, are the people in charge at the moment, like all the coaches that we have in the venue and the building, they make it what it is. They're like the breath of it, and when you've got motivated people that are doing it, it just all comes together to make such a good team. And I like to think that we're all quite honest with each other. And I think sometimes we do sit down and we go, I feel we need to do better. I feel like things are coming and I don't think we're producing as many people. And I think when you've got a team that are quite happy to be honest with each other and have conversations, and like you said, like we said before we start recording, like ego's not a thing. It just can't be. Like, and even though myself and Mark see ourselves as the bosses now, we're more than happy to have like our younger coaches come and say, we think this is wrong and we feel we're not as good as what we should be at this time. And I feel like it's nice to be able to just sit and just have a conversation and go, well, what do you think we could do better? And what do you think we're lacking in? And I know that like some of the coaches underneath me at the moment are super driven and super motivated to try and find that next bit. And I always used to feel like I wanted to try and catch up with Martin with his achievement. And it's nice to know that there are people that want to try and catch up with me and Mark and people like that. So it's nice to know. I mean, it's hard sometimes because where you're so passionate and so motivated, I feel like coach burnout becomes a thing because you can't no one person can stay that motivated all the time 24/7. So you have to look after your team a bit and we have to like be there for each other, which I think is another reason why honesty is the best thing in them sort of situations. You talk to each other, you have team meetings, you check in with each other and just like ask how people are getting on. And I feel like stuff like CPD um is just a thing to continually check in on and just see what do you feel you need to make you a better coach. Like, are there any courses out there that you'd like to do to try and look into? And I think it's just trying to, like we said, like just have people be sponges and just take on as much information as possible and just be open to learn and also like embrace being vulnerable a little bit and just be like, do you know what? I feel a bit vulnerable now. And I know that if we want to continue this streak of like trying to get people on teams, sometimes we might have to change. Sometimes we might have to like try new things. And sometimes, very much like we say to the athletes, sometimes just embrace being vulnerable and just like you learn your best when you're not really comfortable. And I feel like because then you test the true measures of what you're capable of because anyone can be successful if it's happy and it's going and it's lovely. But when you're up against the wall and you can still pick out a result, you know that you're resourceful and you know that you're resilient.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the way you speak just it shows me what your values are. I ask you, do you feel the pressure of running this thing? And you're like, well, I'm not running this thing. It's a team.
Mm,
That just that response, tells me, well, it's about nurturing. It's about everybody. It's about holding each other up. And that is so different than people who are like, yes, I have a legacy and I'm in charge and they must do it my way. And there's only one way. And if you don't cut it, then you're out. It's very different. And now I know, so you and I started coaching the same year. I think we're the same exact age. And I coached, for 15 years before I went into the mental side specifically. And at the end of that, I felt like I knew nothing. I say it all the time, but I felt like by the end of those 15 years, I was like, I have been doing so much wrong for so long. And the times where I grew the most was when I was just completely open and humble and was like, I don't know how to teach level 9 beam. Show me show me what to
mm,
do, and I really just sort of followed my mentors through it. And it was vulnerable to look at this girl who's about to fling herself backwards on a beam. And I'm like, I've never done this before. So I think we should try this. There are those moments, I think, for every coach that having those great mentors allows you to be honest about, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to go ask Coach Mike and,
mm.
and he'll tell me. And so hold on,
Absolutely.
I'll be right back. And so great to be a young coach who's able and willing to go and be like, hey, can you look at this? Like, I'm not actually sure what we're supposed to do here. So I can tell that you have a great place to work just because of the way that you speak. So, okay, let's stay on the, the success mode for a minute longer. Now, I'm sure you have many athletes coming through your facility. Are there specific attributes that you are looking for in athletes that you kind of, tap to go into your team program, that go beyond just physical talent?
Um, I think realistically, like oddly enough, a Canadian trampoline coach, Dave Ross, who produced several Olympians, do you know what I mean? And several Olympic medalists. Um, he kind of said something years and years ago about you don't really know until they're 16, 17. He said, and until they're 16, 17, he said, just make it as fun as possible. Give them as like teach them as much stuff as you can, make it as fun as possible, make sure they know all the attributes and you've kind of like taught them all the different things. Because he said before they're 16, he said they'll constantly flip-flop between different things. And so if you can keep them enjoying it and loving it and know every little bit about things that they might have to do, you'll stand a much better potential of like success. And I feel like when we're taking people into our classes, because we've always wanted to be, and Martin always wanted to have a centre for all, we've got loads of different classes that structure for different people. And we've got like a pathway where we're a little bit more focused on the elite side. And then we've got another competitive pathway that's still competitive, but not as elite as well. And we like to know that there's lots of freedom to move between the pathways because we know sometimes what people want at 10 might be different when they're 13, 14. And like we said earlier about parents might like to think their kid really wants it, and then they go to school and then they start playing netball and they really enjoy it with their friends and then they want to do something else. So I think like the key that we look for to start with is to know that we've got lots of options for people. And in our elite pathway, we focus a lot more on the conditioning, the planning, the psychology, a lot more technical aspects on trying to strive for perfection and excellence. And in our competitive side, we still do these bits and things like that, but there's not as much pressure because we know that it's not for everyone. And in terms of having a business and in terms of having money coming through the door so we can afford to run, we know that like our business is not going to be funded on the elite stream. Our business is going to be funded on the recreational and the competitive stream. And so we know that we've got to keep our numbers like as big as possible. And I always feel the most crying shame in all of sports is when people feel like they can't do it anymore. And so there's no other option than to quit. Whereas we like to think that if they're on the elite stream and they feel like it's not really for them anymore, they might be able to like move into the less pressured competitive stream. And then we might hold on to them for 3 or 4 more years. They might end up becoming a coach. They might end up becoming a judge or an official, or they might just generally just enjoy it because that pressure's been taken off. Or it might even be that they were going through a stressful exam time, and then when they're through their exam time, they actually want to pick it back up and put a bit more effort in, and then they can move back into the elite stream. So I feel like for us, the attributes we kind of search for is just trying to get to know them a lot more and think about what stage are you in at this moment? And we like to think that the freedom that we have for them to be able to move between the pathways, and sometimes we have to move them because they're falling off the perch a little bit, but we always like to know that they've got an option. I think I said to you when I sent you some information that no athlete should ever feel trapped and no athlete should ever feel like there's no answer. And I like to think that within jumpers, if they're on the competitive stream and they want to become into the elite stream, they know the criteria they need to do to try and work for that. And if they're in the elite stream and they feel like it's a bit much and it's a bit too much pressure and they don't really feel they're achieving the things that they want, they don't really want to put the work in, they can maybe move to the competitive. And so that way, rather than just saying it's elite or nothing, like if you don't want to be elite, you can leave and you can take up another sport. We always like to think we reckon we've probably held on to 30%, 40% extra people because we've been able to give them options. And like sometimes if people are just sick of trampolining in general, they might only last a little bit longer. But at the end of the day, we like to know that they've left a little bit more on their terms that way rather than feeling like they've been forced. And I feel like when people feel like they've been forced out of a sport, you'll never see them again. You'll never see their children again. You'll never see like friends or family of them again. Whereas if people have naturally come to their own terms of leaving, um, there's a chance that their family members will come in when they eventually have children. They'll want to bring them in because they know that the club has facilitated them and been there for them at whatever times they have. I don't know whether that really answered your question
Mhm.
about what we did, but it just kind of goes into the values we have that it's just freedom to know that there's options.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, of course, like 14-year-old Rebecca is like, boy, that would have been nice. That would have been nice, because
Yeah.
I walked out because I was trapped. It was like you either go this high track or you can't cut it and you quit. And luckily for me, I got to coach, which so my love stayed strong in the sport. But I mean, what an amazing opportunity to then have this culture of people who just love to do it. That it's
Mm.
not all about the end. It's about this is something I love to do. And if my goals don't align with that group, they align with this. And I think a lot of facilities are starting to have that, the sort of two tracks, but there's this like if you can't perform, you're getting, demoted to this other track, or you will be removed from this elite, you know, place in this gym. And so if you don't get it together, I think there can be sort of this negative motivation attempt, at least, in the artistic side, I see this a lot. And so
Mm.
athletes come to me and they're like, I don't want to get demoted. I'm like, I mean, it's all about perspective because
Yes.
I've known so many athletes who have switched to a slightly less competitive, we call it the Excel track in USAG. And it's amazing. They thrive. They're so happy. They can be more flexible with their skills. They can compete as much, they can train less, they can get more sleep. I mean, there's so many benefits to it. So I mean, it sounds like I don't even need to ask this, but how does one, like a facility, get rid of the stigma around the different tracks, in your opinion?
I think it's more about perception, and I feel like if the coaches and the athletes and the parents and like everyone involved in the process has the right perception of where they're at and what they want to do, I feel like it's a really easy process. I feel like if you're honest with people, and because we all know like to make it as a national squad member, wherever country you're in, or to be an Olympian at some point, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of dedication, and also it's a lot of like letting certain things go and sacrifice, and like that's not for everybody. And like a really good mentor of mine from another club always used to say, if you haven't given them all the information they need for them to know what it is to get there, you can't moan at them if they're not doing it. Like if you haven't given them all the information, if you haven't told them about the importance of flexibility, if you haven't told them about the importance of maybe giving up a certain night out with their friends or something like that, if you haven't told them any of this, you can't moan at them if they're surprised by the fact that this has come about. And I feel like if everyone's got the right perception of where they're at, and sometimes the hardest thing is like educating the parents around this, because it's one of these ones where like if everyone's on board and everyone understands the process, it's like for example, if I have an 11-year-old child where the parents are set on the fact that they want their kid to have a GB jacket at some point and they want them to be on a national squad, I'd always try and line out every little thing that I think they would have to do, and every little thing I think they'd have to sacrifice, and every little thing that I think that would have to be put in place for them to know. And it's not like an absolute, it's just obviously my opinion about what I think they need to do. And then sometimes the parents go, oh, that's a lot of work. And I'm like, well, yeah, this is what we think it is that you have to do. And then if they sit there and they go, well, no, if you really want, and then you've got the good parents when they sit to their child and they go, well, if this is what you want to do, this is what you've got to do. And then you got the parents that are like, oh, that seems like a lot. And as soon as parents are like, that seems like a lot, you're like, well, I can pretty much tell you you're probably not going to make it. Do you know what I mean? Because like, it's one of them, we've got one of them cultures at the moment, I believe, in the UK. I don't know what it's like in America, but in the UK at the moment, society is shifting a little bit where kids are getting away with so much, and like they're being allowed so much freedom and like so much opinion to go, no, I don't like that. And like there's not as much I've got to work hard to get my goals as I think there was back in the day. And I think that's a big thing that's going to affect a lot of development of athletes, because I feel sometimes the whole aspect of just, you know what, you got to muck in, you got to work hard, and you got to go for it, and you can't blame anyone. If anything goes wrong, you've just got to suck it up and you got to go, right, I've been given all the information, I need to do it. And if I haven't done it, ultimately it's my fault that I haven't done that. And I think that's kind of slipping a little bit now. And I think people are like, well, it has to be the coach. It has to be this. It has to be
Mm.
something else. It can't be me. And I feel like it's really tricky that we have to, like in our society, that we have to deal with that. But I feel if the perception's right, I think like the process is easy. I feel most sorry for 16-year-olds, 16 pluses who are still good, but not great because they still want to do stuff and they still want to be competitive, and that's why we like to have the freedom, because we've got our elite squad, and then we've got something we call a senior squad, which is full of like 15 pluses. And like some of them, they come in, they're like 19, 20 years old, and they're just over the moon that they've done a double back. And like in terms of like being a national squad member, it's miles off what they need. But when you sit there and you just think, I just love the fact that you're literally excited and over the moon and just buzzing that you've done a double back. Because and without having that freedom to go, everyone has a place and everyone has like a right to try and achieve whatever they want to achieve. And for some of them people, doing one double back in their life is the equivalent of going to the Olympics. And like
Mhm.
if you can share in that journey and like provide them that opportunity to still feel valued and still feel like their journey and their process is just as important to them as someone
Mhm.
going for an Olympics, it's you're on to a winner.
Yes. Yes. It's I would agree that we've sort of like swung the pendulum from you must do what I say and there you have no voice, no consent is possible and you will like do it or get off my beam was basically how I felt
Mm,
like I was coached. And then now it's sort of like, well, everyone's afraid of safe sport in the US. All of the coaches are like, I'm going to get reported if I say one
mm,
like loud word. And so they're sort of walking on eggshells. And then the kids are like, I'm uncomfortable because I just went through COVID and I mean, everything is uncomfortable. I'm like, naturally, I mean, kids are more depressed. They're more anxious. They need more emotionally in post COVID than they did. Like the studies show 25% of adolescents are now reaching clinical levels of anxiety and depression.
mm.
So that's you have four kids on your team. One of them is struggling,
Yeah,
and you've got eight, you've got two, 12, you've got three. And so it is a different world that we live in. And it's there's always this balance of, okay, I want to nurture these children. I want to give these children a place where they feel safe emotionally, physically, and they have told me in our meeting that they want to be an Olympian. So it's like walking that line.
yeah,
And like you said, previously, it's individual. And each
yeah,
kid is going to need a different training plan. One kid is going to need you to ride them to the Olympics, and one
yeah,
of them is going to need you to be completely different.
yeah.
So, could you give an example of, a couple of kids? Because you talk about how you coach the personality and it's not a one size fits all. Um, a couple kids who were both highly successful but had very different coaching experiences with you, or they had very different needs.
I think like the one that springs to mind straight away is I had Louise that I worked with, who was like a GB international and was on senior teams. And I had a guy called Josh who wasn't a GB member, but he was on the national circuit doing big things, trying to push towards England squads and GB squads. And they were both highly successful. And Louise was very much very academic, loved her numbers, loved her stats, loved her diary taking, would be militant, as you know from like the recent podcast, wanted to write down everything, literally everything, and used to find like the fun in maths to try and get everything done. And Josh um wasn't that way. He like definitely wanted a little bit more like freedom. He wasn't a big fan of note taking, wasn't a big fan of diary taking. And so I'd often find myself setting some plans and then them not really being done, and like I'd see like the charts on the wall like not filled out that I'd given to him. And so you kind of have to adapt a little bit. And so it became with Josh, it was more like just thinking on my feet and just thinking what we're going to do today, and just kind of setting him mental things for him to think about on that day in that moment, and know that at the end of the day, Josh, that's how Josh worked best. And the more I kind of realized that the more I'd get down on him about this insistence about wanting to take down notes, the worse he would train. And like it's just one of these situations where you have to play to people's strengths, and like they would achieve completely different things and different successes, like going at it completely different angles. And like Louise, because Louise would train with Josh sometimes, Louise would literally say to me, like afterwards, she's like, it would drive me mad. She said, going in with no plan. I don't get it. What he comes in and just like you chat about it on the day. And I'm like, yeah, but that's just how it works for him. And it's one of the ones where Josh like has recently gone into the world of work properly, and he now works night shifts. And so we've had to adjust his training again. And for a young person to suddenly have to adapt to working nights, and so training a bit more during the day, that was a big shock for him. So even more reason to kind of be a little bit more uh, have a bit more freedom to his planning, because sometimes we might plan a certain session like in my head, thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to get him to try and do today. And then when he comes in, he's like, Jake, because he works on night shift on the trains, so it's very physical work. He'll come in and he'll go, James, I'm done. Like I've come in. I don't know why I've come in, but I'm done. He said, mentally, I don't think I can do anything. And I was like, okay, well, then let's quickly try and come up with something to make you feel like you can de-stress a little bit. And I think that's another reason why I think like I enjoy my coaching sometimes, because the sheer challenge of it, the sheer challenge of like having someone come in and going, I've come in because I know you wanted me to come in, and I know I want to come in because I've got to get away from my life for a little bit, for an hour and a half, but you're going to have to help me here, and you're going to have to think on the spot within a minute, because I can't do the plan you set me originally. And then I just love that challenge of just thinking, how can I make this session feel like something that's been valued for them if you've had to change it last minute. And Louise, sometimes I tried to get her to stray a little bit away from how she planned, just to try and give her a bit more freedom, and just to give her a little bit more sign of how things are, because now obviously she's going for circus activities and Cirque du Soleil, and that's completely not about writing stuff down and like having stats and having things like that. And so the fact that I tried to incorporate that into her training when I knew that was part of what she wanted to do, it was all about future planning of, I know Cirque isn't going to be like this. And I know all your preparation isn't going to be about stats and numbers and repetitions and stuff like that. It's going to be a little bit more laid back. So I've got to start to prepare you early for the fact that you might have to think outside your comfort zone a little bit. And sometimes with Josh, I try and install little bits of what Louise would do just to give him a little bit of a change. So it's about just trying to be adaptable. And I always kind of feel I get really stressed when I see elite coaches going, they adapt to me or they can go somewhere else, because I've got the proven track records. I know how to get people to the here. And I kind of think, but how many people are you turning away? How many potential people are you like wonderful, wonderful experiences are you not having because you're strict on your regime? Whereas I always like to think, if I can adapt and I can like help them with their personality and get the best out of them that works for them, with a little bit of stuff on the side, because obviously you can't just say to anyone who comes in, oh yeah, just do your own thing and you'll be fine, you'll be amazing. You got to keep them like on a little bit of a path, but just be, like I said at the start, as a coach, sometimes you've got to embrace being vulnerable and thinking to yourself, right, okay, I'm going to have to like plan on the spot here, or I'm going to have to rethink. And sometimes with Josh, I had to rethink 7 or 8 times just to think, okay, this is going to be an interesting one. But but even little things with Josh, I'm very much aware I'm waffling at the moment, so I do apologize.
You're doing great.
But with Josh, sometimes it's like, because he's a bit of a lad. I don't know if you know that term too much in America, but it's a bit more of a, he's a bit of a, yeah, I can do this. Yeah, whatever.
We call
Like,
that a bro. A bro.
yeah, yeah, a
Yeah.
bro. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, it makes me laugh because he's got this one skill that's called a Miller, and it's basically a double back somersault with 3 twists in it. I think Wayne Miller from USA was the first person to do it, I think, and so they called it the Miller. And he becomes very vulnerable when he does this skill, because he says to me, "Do you know what, James? Like, I've never worried about any skill in my life ever, but this skill just gets to me." He said, "This skill really gets to me. Like, my heart goes a little bit fast when I have to do this skill, because I know I could hurt myself, and this is the only skill I've ever thought to myself, I could hurt myself." And I'm like, and for someone who, on one hand, is quite a lad and quite a bro about it, to have him comfortable enough to embrace that vulnerability and not feel like he has to put on a show, and
Mm.
just sit there and be comfortable enough to say to me, I'm a little bit scared of this one. And I think it's just testament of our relationship and the trust that he has to just go, I can open up a little bit with these situations. And I feel anytime you can get an athlete to open up a little bit and show their true side, I think you've got much more potential to get the best out of them.
Yes. Well, and the research shows, fun fact, that if your fight or flight, if your nervous system is flaring to the point where you're kind of getting into your stomach and you're having that, I call the doom stomach, and you're having more than the like, let's go attack this feeling, but that, oh, I'm feeling threatened feeling, connecting with a coach with just a warm facial expression can actually bring the nervous system back into fight or flight, back into attack mode where you want to
Yeah.
be for doing these big skills. Breathing, connecting, just spending a moment telling a coach how you're feeling can bring your nervous system back into the mode you want it in. So having a coach that's not like, well, suck it up and do it or get off my team, which will send you
Mm,
deeper into doom. It's that, hey, let's talk about this. Yeah, thanks for sharing that with me. What do you want to do to get prepared? I'm here.
mm,
I got you. I got you. That can allow an athlete to have the physical ability to go do that skill well. The connection with another human. Just like science. So cool. So I can't let you go without talking about mental blocks or, in
mhm,
GB, it's called lost moves. And I love how you talk about that there's two different types, that there are
mhm,
two different things that can happen, that athletes either sort of seem to lose the ability to take off for the skill or they get lost in the air. And those are the two that I see as well. The getting lost in the air starts kind of when you're twisting, the twisties, as Simone Biles
mhm.
experienced. So what are, I know, and I loved your answer, talking about this, that you say, well, every athlete's different. So there is no one size fits all method for working through them, which is absolutely true. But if you were going to give some tips for athletes who are struggling, what are sort of your go-tos for each different type of lost move experience?
Well, basically, if people are like I said to you, like I often feel like, and again, it's just opinion. Like it's not based on any like factual text from anything or anything like that. But like, I always feel like someone's either struggling to actually physically take off, or they can take off fine. It's just they get lost in the middle. And like I always feel like the one where they can take off fine and they get lost in the middle, that's much harder to try and fix because there's nothing about their confidence to take off. And whereas if someone is struggling to actually take off for a skill, 9 times out of 10, I think if you can just correct that, they'll be fine because like they haven't lost anything within the skill. It's just the ability to go. And I feel like my best tips are for both situations, to be honest, is just try and make them feel like they're valued and try and make them feel like you're going to give them time because a lot of people feel panicked about what does this mean? Like that's their first things. We're like that with any situation. If they're having a problem and they're not sure about what they can do, they always worry about the connotation of what that might then mean to something. Whereas if you can be a coach that will have patience and feel and give them time and feel like you're going to be there for them, like whether it's to have a chat with them about it or take them to one side, offer them a private lesson, offer them some time one on one, they'll start to feel valued and start to feel like they're going to help me through this. I think it's very easy for coaches to kind of go, well, we just want to try and ignore it and see if they can get over it. Like I don't think that's helpful because like that works for maybe 1% of people, but like there's a big old 99% of people that just need help. And I feel like with a lot of people, whether they're going through this at a young age or whether they're going through it at 23, if you give them time and you feel like you're giving them your attention, and if you feel like you're giving them the opportunity to like speak out, they're much more likely to trust you and much more likely to work through some options that you might have. I feel like if I can give you a quick tip on each one, I feel like if it's a takeoff phase that they're really worrying about, I'd I'd be trying to encourage them to go back stages. But also when you're going back stages, you've got to be really appreciative of the fact that this might be embarrassing for them. It might make them feel like they're ashamed of doing it. And so it's trying to make it sometimes in a way that they don't even realize they're doing it. Sometimes if like one of my athletes had a problem with double back, say, I'd incorporate a lot of play backwards stuff at the start of the session with everyone playing together, just without them even realizing that they're doing it, just so they know that they're not being signaled out and they're not being like mocked by anyone else, and like and just trying to make it and just trying to make it in a situation where they feel like, oh, I was doing that in the warm up. Oh, okay. And so when you're like, oh, so now try this. If it's something where it's like halfway through the skill and the takeoff's not a problem, I'd really go back to visual cues and just really go back to stuff like when you're doing your preps and when you're doing your things. I'm a big believer that if the athlete can see what they're doing and if the athlete can have certain vision points that they look for, they're going to feel a lot more safe to take it on to the next stage. So if we'll stick with like a double front somersault with a half twist in it, a lot of the time we tend to do like a 1 3/4 front somersault, like see the end deck or see like the cross and then brine it over the top. And like a lot of people, if they learn it a double front method and then pop a twist at the end, there's not as much vision. And so like if someone was struggling with like that aspect of it and they were confident to take off, they just get lost. I'd be like, well, let's go back to get you seeing stuff and let's get you back to actually having a point where you can look and go, right, okay, I've seen the end deck twist. I've seen the end deck twist. And then it becomes something that they can rely on stats and they can rely on figures, which helps them when they're feeling a little bit. I feel like when you're struggling subjectively, you have to try and maybe push objectively. And I feel like because when you're trying to find this like a subjective route to something, like sometimes you need to go for the objective side and go, well, I'm basing this on feelings at the moment. Whereas if I can just actually try and look for something, then I've got something that's solid that's not going to go away. Like if they're trying to do this 1 3/4 somersault, see the end deck and turn, they're either going to see it or they're not. Whereas if like they're doing something where they're going, well, if it feels okay and I feel like I've got the twist in the right place, I'll turn. That can change 20 times out of 20.
Yeah.
Whereas so I think like that would be my main tips. My one tip for all of them is just make them feel like you've got your time and you're going to be there for them, and also try and make it as fun. And if you have to go back stages, try not to make it embarrassing and try and make it a situation where they feel like they're doing it without even realizing they're doing it. And also with that, they'll probably gain more trust in you anyway, because they're like, oh, my coach appreciates that this is embarrassing for me. And my coach
Mhm.
appreciates that this is really hard for me. And like, if he's putting himself out there to make it easier for me, I know that he's going to, like, I trust him and I'm going to go through with him on this. And then obviously, like I said, halfway through the skill, if it's happening, really trust your vision points, really trust something to look for that won't go away, that won't change, something that you know is going to be there all the time, like 100 attempts out of 100 attempts. If you're looking for that end deck, it will be there or it won't be there. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to a feeling. And like I said, if it's the struggle with the actually taking off, just be happy to go back stages.
Yes, and that is so important, the emotional piece of this. These are adolescents for the most part, adolescents and teenagers who are in a stage of their development where they are incredibly socially motivated. Their whole purpose in life is to look around their world and go, where do I fit? What's important? Who am I? Do I belong? So then they have this experience where their brain detects a threat, their skills are acting up, and the solution is either avoid or embarrass myself. And I mean, that is a huge, hard choice. And I actually will sit with kids and say, if you knew you would have this skill back confidently, would it be worth a little bit of embarrassment working back on this skill? And they're like, 100% yes. Absolutely, it would. But it's hard in that moment when they go,
Mhm.
you want me to do what? And I'm on the elite team and I'm doing this shouldn't be happening to me. And I tell kids that the way to eliminate skill loss, the way to completely eliminate it is to have that connection with your body. Something feels off and you immediately go work a prep. You
Yeah,
do a progression, you reassure your brain, you communicate with your coach, you grab a mat, you get a spot, you do something before you ever freeze, before
yeah,
you ever get before you get lost in the air, you communicate, you back it up. And that takes a lot of humility and vulnerability, like you said,
absolutely.
to be willing to be the one person doing a single when the rest of the group is doing doubles. And and the most mature athlete that really holds on to their confidence is the person who just doesn't care.
Yeah,
They're like, this is what my brain needs. The brain, I got you. Let's do it. Okay, feeling great. And then off to the assignment. And there never even was that dip in confidence.
absolutely.
So having a coach in your corner who would never be like, what are you doing over there? Why are you doing You stop wasting time and get to your assignment. A coach who goes, yeah, do what you got to do. Let me know what you
Hmm.
need. That's the person who makes that athlete feel safe to trust themselves because they trust you. And then they don't have to experience those big blockages because they just do what they need to do and proceed.
Absolutely.
So, so athletes out there, if you knew you would get your skills back and be confident, is it worth being embarrassed? And coaches, can you stop embarrassing the children?
Yeah.
Please stop embarrassing the children. And teammates, don't ask questions, just like cheer them on. All progress is progress from today forward, not from what you think you should have been able to do.
And in
So,
and in some situations, like I would say, if you're gauging the situation, like sometimes it is best to just take them out and offer them some one-on-one lessons for a little bit. Like it's one of them situations you have to gauge it. Everyone's different, and it's like if you know it's going to be really hard for them to be able to take that step back, and also if they've struggled at school with bullying, if they've struggled with social situations like that before, sometimes it might be best to give them a couple of weeks of just one-on-ones instead, just over that initial period, and it's just taking that up. And again, the same thing, if they feel like you've got their back and you're making active things to try and help them, they're probably more likely to want to reintegrate back into the squad when they know that things have been addressed and like things are working. It's just like knowing, treating each athlete differently and just trying to think like, okay, like I'm going to base this on who you are and not what I think you should be.
mm. Oh, what a perfect place to wrap. I mean, I hope that so many people hear this because I mean, it's this everything you're saying is not it's not rocket science.
No.
It's brilliant, but it's
Yeah.
not overly complicated. And so I think the more coaches that can be inspired to coach this way, to coach the individual, to be open to the fact that this is a child who has feelings and we can have a very high standard once we've had that conversation
Yep.
and set those expectations of if you want to reach this, then if you don't do this, you'll be disappointed. Is everyone on the same page? Okay, let's proceed. I'm going to now push you far out of your comfort zone to give you what you say you want. I mean, it's not complicated, but it's
No.
something that works. And so thank you for first of all the work that you're doing, and second of all for spending time with me today. This has been such a
No, it's
pleasure.
been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. So if people want to follow your journey or reach out with questions, what's the best way for them to find you?
They can follow me on Instagram, or they can like go onto our club website, and it's the easiest club website in the world. It's just www.trampoline.co.uk. Like
Okay.
when my
Great.
when my boss was originally doing this trampoline stuff, it wasn't as well known out there, and I think like he managed to get that domain name like
He was
trampoline.co.uk.
the first, literally the first.
Exactly. I mean, he's an absolute trendsetter. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
And I'm sure you can put up my Instagram
Yep.
page. That's not a problem, and
Yep.
people can follow you.
I'll link to the club. I'll link to your Instagram. James
Yeah, yeah.
Coomber, thank you so much.
You're absolutely welcome. It's been lovely.